Happy to see you all here. See you, of course. And welcome to our seminar meeting, which is organized by the Graduate School of Yaşar University as part of seminar series, graduate seminar series. And today, our Evrim Işık, you all know her, I assume. She's going to be giving a talk. And let me introduce her. You already know her, but here's a short bio. So Evrim completed her MA in English Language and Literature at Yaşar University, and she wrote her thesis under the supervision of Assistant Professor Trevor Hope. And now she's part of our department as a research assistant. Evrim is pursuing her studies in English literature and currently doing her PhD in English literature at Pamukkale University, right, Evrim?
Yes, hocam.
And working on her dissertation now, which is on George Orwell and Paradoxes of Memory. Evrim is also a published translator of literature. She translated Kafka from German and now working on a whole collection of George Orwell, which she believes will accompany and help her PhD process. And Evrim defines herself as an eternal student and a passionate lover of literature.
That's right. Thank you.
I added this up, but I think it's
Thank
true.
you, hocam. I didn't think it was necessary, for people who are all here, for literature.
Okay, well,
Thank you very much.
you're welcome. Well, after Evrim's speech, there's going to be a Q&A session, so you may ask your questions and forward your comments. You may write them as well, and we're going to be talking about her paper afterwards. Okay, here you go, Evrim.
Okay, thank you, Evrim hocam, and thank you everyone for being here today for my talk. Before we begin, I must admit that poetry isn't really my thing, but as you already know, I'll be talking about Sylvia Plath and Didem Madak poems here today. So first, I would like to share with you what motivated me for this piece. This comparative idea was suggested in a PhD class with dear Professor Mehmet Ali Çelikel, and it was only then that I got to know the wonderful Turkish poet Didem Madak. Maybe you are already familiar with her. And she is indeed from Izmir. And when I read her, I instantly fell in love with her poetry. And if you're familiar with her works, I think you'll understand what I mean. Her poetry draws you in. It's melancholy is beautiful. It is musical, lyrical, paradoxical, and there is something inexplicably fragile, I think, in her poems. So I met her late in my life, and I was also very sorry to find out that she had already passed when she was only 41 in 2011. She didn't commit suicide like Plath, but she died of cancer after a battle of a year, I think. Her poetry is not yet available in English, but it is, I think, powerful, and I believe her poetry and person deserve to be known, spread, and remembered. And that is why I chose to, write something on her, this comparative piece. And I don't think this paper is yet mature or sufficiently academic, but I hope you'll all enjoy the comparison because, as you'll notice, they have lots of similarities in their poetry. And before I begin, this is my first talk at Yaşar, and it is for Yaşar. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank people who taught me and who guided me in my MA education. So if you're here, Trevor Hocam, Ahmet Hocam, Jeff Hocam, I would like to thank you very much for all your help. And I think without your contributions, this talk would never be possible. So the title that I keep changing is now Florality and the Female Voice. And the purpose is to comparatively look at Sylvia Plath and Didem Madak's flower poems or floral poems. I would like to begin with an introduction, and then I'll move on to, actually, I'll walk you through the two poems. They're long ones, but, I've designed this thing as more like a talk, not as, because, well, I don't have paper anyways, but this will be like a talk, and your contributions will be very, very important to me. So, to begin with, the confessional and autobiographical mode and the feminine, and I'm also tempted to say feminist undertone, that characterize American poet Sylvia Plath's poetry resonate in the poetry of another Turkish female poet, Didem Madak. Plath and Madak wrote poetry almost 4 decades apart in different languages and under vastly different social, cultural, and historical circumstances. And yet I believe their lines communicate strikingly similar emotions and images, and they, I think, uniquely connect the two women. To name just a few of these similarities, they both are largely dominated by the emotional and physical difficulties of their private lives as women, and their works deliver intimate and tightly interlinked details from their personal and psychological lives. Both of their works vibrate with rich social, cultural, emotional, and philosophical images and ideas, and the poets also share a quite unique poetics that is constructed on simple, everyday objects that are usually associated with the feminine or domestic space, and their language is daily, almost raw, but also full of intense emotions. And both of these women feel, well, apparently they feel trapped and confined by the challenges of womanhood in a patriarchal world, albeit in different countries and times. And their poetry is full of telling instances showing that they're broken, depressed, and utterly frustrated by these challenges. What is more remarkable, however, they also choose to express this frustration with the patriarchal world through similar binary systems as they juxtapose color with light, human with object, masculine with feminine, and bliss with pain. They also display a tendency to reverse and subvert the usual connotations of objects, everyday objects mostly, and ideas that are usually strongly associated with the domestic or feminine space. So flowers, for one, recur in their poetry as a feminine symbol. However, both poets, as I've already said, subvert flowers' instant association with love, life, and hope and whatnot, and reestablish them in their poetry as symbols of their frustration with men, their confinement in the domestic space, and their desire to be left alone. With this in mind, I will walk you through 2 poems, and these are Sylvia Plath's 1961 poem Tulips and Didem Madak's 2000 poem Çiçekli Şiirler Yazmak İstiyorum Bayım, which can be, I think, roughly translated into English as I want to write flower or flowery or floral poems, sir. And I'll try to investigate the ways in which these 2 poets use flowers as a central image in their own unique ways, of course, to communicate their similar thoughts and feelings of frustration and resentment. Now, I'll begin with Sylvia Plath's Tulips, and I want to share the poem with you. Okay, share screen and Tulips. I think you can see my screen now. Some are colored, some bits are colored. As you'll see, I'll try to guide you through the poem. So this poem is written after an operation in 1691, and it's 2 years before Sylvia Plath's suicide. And it's a poem of 9 stanzas and 63 lines, and it's written as typical in Sylvia Plath in 3 verse. She, Plath's reader, takes, excuse me, Plath's speaker takes the reader on an intimate journey of the time when she stayed in hospital recovering from this operation, appendectomy. So she is clearly the speaker in the poem, and she speaks to the reader in a first-person voice or a confessional I in the present tense to relate this experience in the hospital room as she slowly wakes up following the operation and gains consciousness. She alternates between enjambed and end-stop stanzas throughout the poem, and she carefully constructs a different scene in each of them, each of the stanzas, and each scene in each paragraph corresponds to a stage of consciousness that the speaker is experiencing while she gradually and very, very reluctantly gains consciousness. The titular tulips appear in the opening line of the poem and follow the speaker throughout, gaining life and force and changing shape in each stanza. So you see the opening line here, the tulips are too excitable, it is winter here. So this is how the poem begins, and the opening line, I think, is a very curt expression, and she just says the tulips are too excitable and it is winter here. So with this, the poem opens with an instant tension created by these contrasting images and colors of the too excitable red tulips and the quiet, white and snowed in winter. Well, monotonous and, you know, surrounded by a whiteness. And I think, well, of course, white is, it's just there to remind us of death, I think, in this poem. So excitable, the word excitable, and it's consolidated with the adverb to here. I think this remains deliciously ambiguous, but I think it's also a sign that the tulips, when they first appear, just perplex the reader, the speaker momentarily, and then she quickly finds herself passing into that white and quiet realm of numbness and disconnection again after this momentary encounter. Due to some, time concerns, I won't be able to talk about all of these stanzas in detail, but I'll try to tell you what's going on here now. After this slightly agitated, well, I find the tone a bit agitated and nervous here. After this slightly agitated opening line, there is no mention of these tulips in the following three stanzas. So here in these three stanzas, they just disappear. Until the fifth stanza, where the tulips reappear and they are more powerful this time, we follow, well, in these three stanzas, we follow the speaker in a flow of white and light imagery as she slowly wakes up. First, as you can see here in the stanza, she is surrounded by nurses within the whiteness of the hospital walls, and the nurses here are compared to gulls in their white caps, so they kind of amplify the white imagery. And in this dreamy atmosphere, the speaker is in a calm dream state induced, well, probably by anesthetics, and she feels utterly liberated and almost blissful now that she's washed free of her life, possessions, family, and identity, or what she calls her baggage. So she says here, as you can see now, I have lost myself, I am sick of baggage. Well, this baggage is, of course, both literal in the shape of a patent leather overnight case, in the shape of a black pillbox, but it's also a metaphorical, an emotional baggage of her family and responsibilities and her responsibilities towards them. And we already know that Sylvia Plath was really, really troubled by those domestic responsibilities. So here in this state, in this anesthetic-induced state of numbness, she is, as I've already I think I've already read this bit. She's blissful and utterly liberated. She feels free, and she's just sinking in that dreamy state. Gradually, however, the speaker's suffering becomes more evident as she wakes up to notice the smiles of her husband and child reaching out of the picture frame and painfully sinking into her skin like smiling hooks you can see here. So here in this bit, she's beginning to gain consciousness, and she begins to notice the objects around her in well, in their real light, not as, you know, she sees these nurses as the gulls. Her body, in that dreamy state, her body longs for that idyllic state of freedom and probably death, and yet she's agonizingly hooked on the baggage that she's meant to carry, and is forced by the tulip's disturbing presence to wake up and acknowledge life and return to a painful existence. So here is a part of the journey. And after the first appearance of the tulips in the opening line, we just don't see them, but there I think of them, I like to think of them as a kind of gigantic flash, and you know, they just appear and disappear, and but they have a lasting effect on the speaker, and their image remains at the back of her head, and as she's gaining consciousness. And the what these tulips remind her of aren't really you know, her loving associations, as she mentions here, or you know, a family that she loves or misses. They're little smiling hooks. That's how she sees them. I think that's a very interesting thing to say when one is talking about one's family, especially children. But of course, this existence, whatever it covers or gives Plath, is just painful. And we already know that she committed suicide at a very, very early age. And this was written 2 years before her suicide. Of course, she this poem gives us an idea about the state of her mind, maybe. So here, as along with, you know, as she goes on to drown here in these three stanzas, and she loses her baggage and she feels free. She is swept clear of her loving associations, and she watches her tea set, her bureaus of linen, her books sink out of sight. I think this is important here, because what she watches, they're all domestic objects here: a tea set, a bureau of bureaus of linen, and her books. Of course, the books here create a contrast with the feminine associations of tea set and linen, I think, and maybe also introduces, along with the consciousness that she's gaining, introduces her identity as an important intellectual that really, you know, directed the poetry of her times. And in the end, she loses everything, and she just says she is a nun now. She's purified, and there are some religious references here. She's purified, she's cleared free of her loving associations, the husband, the hooks of the children, the smiling hooks of the photo, and also I think the image of the flowers also grow distant momentarily here. She feels like a nun at the climax of what that process of gaining consciousness. She feels the devoted love or the renunciation that a nun voluntarily goes through with, you know, when she believes in the necessity of things. So here she calls herself a nun, and she says she's never been so pure. I also want to draw your attention to the metaphors here that she uses to define herself. First, she sees herself as a pebble, and then she becomes, as you can see here, a 30-year-old cargo boat that is laden with the baggage, of course. And then she, as a cargo boat, she just sinks in slowly into that state of comatose, I think, but temporary state of non-existence. So she feels pure until she feels just completely pure, and she just announces the return of the flowers in the next stanza with these words. I didn't want any flowers, she begins, and I only wanted to lie with my hands turned up and be utterly empty. How free it is, you have no idea how free. So I think there is this passage into a pleading tone here as she gains consciousness. And with this, she intensifies the personal tone of the experience, and I think also tells us what she really wants. She just wants to. She just wants that utter emptiness that the anesthetics gave her. She also, from these expressions, I think she also seems to draw absolute peace and a profound sense of freedom. And before the arrival or the reappearance of these tulips, the tulips, however, when they reappear again here in the fifth stanza, they just become stronger symbols, and they go on to gain force in the rest of the poem. The poems here, they just very insistently invite the speaker back to life and existence from a place that is beyond family, possessions, and history. Well, she just desires, she longs for that emptiness, and apparently she is just in pain because she's gaining consciousness again. And after their return, the tulips go on to be the opening images in the remaining stanzas, and they grow more lifelike in each to become dangerous animals at the end of the poem, as you can see here. So here, after their reappearance, they just gain life and force. Also resonating I think the state of consciousness that the speaker experiences along with this. And here, as you can see, well, here in this stanza, this begins with the tulips, and now here they hurt her, they begin to hurt her. They were just a nuisance in the background at the very beginning, but now they begin to hurt the speaker, Sylvia Plath's speaker. And then they become more and more animate now. They watch her in the next stanza, and they turn to her. They are personified here, but as you can see also here, the speaker degrades herself to a cut paper shadow that is trapped between the eyes of the sun and the tulips, the eyes of the tulips. They are becoming increasingly lifelike towards, till the end of the poem from here on. So here is something very interesting. After she starts seeing them here, they begin to talk to her wounds, as you can see. So she begins to hear them breathe lightly through their white swaddlings, like an awful baby. I think that's a very, very interesting simile here. And then their redness talks to her wound, and they correspond. Here, an awful baby, the tulips, the awful baby is, I think, again a very feminine and a very domestic symbol and for the tulips, because the tulips here are what they remind the speaker of instantly is a baby. So life for Plath and that existence for Plath is an awful baby. So they do remind, I think, the speaker of Sylvia Plath of an awful baby, but the life and liveliness that they convey is, well, is just what brings back an awful baby. That's how she makes she creates another parallel between her domestic life and its dominance, its importance in her female and feminine world. Like an awful baby here that demands attention, the tulips raise their voice and they begin to talk. They talk to the speaker's wounds. They weigh her down. They upset her with their sudden tongues and their color, and they become a dozen red lead sinkers round her neck at the end of this line. You can see. Sorry. Of course, here, after an awful baby, now the tulips become red lead sinkers round her neck. Now she's sinking again. She was sinking as a cargo boat, and now she's sinking again, but this time in existence. It was a non-existence previously. This time she's sinking in existence, and well, this sinking is sort of triggered and initiated by these tulips, and they now turn into red lead sinkers round her neck, and they they drown her, they choke her, and they weigh her down, and they drag her numb body back into life and existence. So the tulips drown here in the drown her, I think here. Well, the tulips drown the speaker in the life that they already represent, because the life and vividness and vivacity that they have is nothing other than painful, a painful reminder of the speaker's domestic life. So again here, I already talked about these. Well, an awful baby, their sudden tongues and color, and they become red lead sinkers around the neck. And now, in the next line, before the closing of the poem, she again goes back to her desire to efface herself and how tulips forced her to wake up from this much desired dream. So here she says another curt ending and another curt expression. After speaking of the desire to efface herself, she says, "The vivid tulips eat my oxygen," very curtly again. Now, with this, I think, sentence, with this line, the speaker, who was in a sort of a coma-like state, now comes back to life, and she becomes aware of the tulips, their vividness, and their how they eat away at her oxygen along with her non-consciousness. Now they become loud, and they kind of start to grow more and more clearer and clearer in this part of the poem. So here, okay, here, sorry, the tulips become, loud and noisy. And here also the speaker, 8 and 9 stanzas, the speaker continues to complain about the tulips. So first she just expressed her dislike of their presence in the room, but now she's begun to complain about them. She can, with their arrival, they turn increasingly intrusive and energetic, and the whiteness, they just start to erase the whiteness, the surrounding whiteness here, and draw the attention to themselves in full light. So finally here, the speaker says it out loud that she thinks of them as dangerous animals that are opening like the mouth of some great African cat. So they've become, the tulips are now dangerous animals. So they were an awful baby, and now they're dangerous animals. But also this danger animals reminds the Sylvia Plath of her heart opening and closing with the pumping of the blood. So also you can see here it opens and closes its bowl of red blooms out of sheer love of me, a bit ironically. And in the end, excuse me. So in this final stanza, the speaker also utters that the white walls also seem to be warming up, coming alive, and leaving their early whiteness due to the effect of the tulips. So that dreamy state now has turned into a vivid and realistic state. And after this introduction that, you know, the walls also seem to be warming themselves, so she's now settling in the new atmosphere of her existence, and she furiously adds here that they should be behind bars like dangerous animals. They should be behind like dangerous animals because they remind Sylvia Plath, Sylvia Plath speaker, of life, of her painful, torturous existence, and well, of course, before her suicide, which I think makes these flowers more of a dominant image. The flowers become terrifying and dangerous entities for the speaker by the end of the poem, and they're also warm and full of life, and they're warming up the sick room as if they were on fire. So everything is invigorating in the room, and also the speaker's imagination is also going wild in this last stanza. So at the end, water, does she taste water here in the closing lines? The water I taste is warm and salt like the sea. So this could be the warmness and salty taste of her own tears, or I don't know, maybe the medications she's given. But she tastes, and her also senses come back to life with this, her heart pumping blood. Now she's flesh and blood, and her heart is pumping blood. It's opening and closing, and tulips are there in all their vivacity, and they all come together to remind once again of the life that she's leading, and with these domestic images. The idea of health or wellness is so foreign to her, as we can see here, and it comes from a foreign country. She doesn't want it. She treats health, this state of being healthy, as a foreign state of a foreign and unknown state, perhaps. And the waking effect of the tulips and gaining back consciousness seemed to upset the speaker more than anything here in the poem, which also, of course, I've already mentioned this, but these strong images can also be associated with Plath's actual deteriorating mental and physical health at the time. So I think overall, throughout the poem, Sylvia Plath very strongly establishes these these flowers as the source of pain rather than a source of life or love. And she subverts these very highly feminine images into different ones. She turns them into sources of pain that remind her and other females, of course, of domestic responsibilities that cover a huge part of their lives. And well, we know this dilemma that Sylvia Plath has in from many of her other poems. You know, she has the 3 women poems, so she already has that idea of being a torn woman between her domestic responsibilities and her intellectual life. And now I would like to move on to Didem Madak and her shorter poem. So here, this poem also, both poems introduce flowers as as a central image beginning in their titles. And then Sylvia Plath, as we saw, contrasts the images and then subverts them in the course of her poem. This poem here, it's unavailable in English, and I hope, well, I do have intentions. I really would love to try at least to translate Madak into English. I think that would be a very, very good contribution to the field. This poem here begins with a kind of a side note, as you can see from, a comic character, a fictional character created by a Swedish cartoonist. She says, well, I think is a political oxymoron. She says, "Zenciler prensesi olacağım, hayat işte o zaman başlayacak." Which, well, I can translate this roughly as she says, well, I want to become, or I will become the Negro princess, and then life will begin. This is an oxymoron and also introduces an impossibility that will follow us, I think, throughout Didem Madak's poem. Madak's poem here is also written in free verse, and they really share lots of common stylistic points with Sylvia Plath's poetry. It's written in free verse, it doesn't have a set or regular rhyme scheme, but it's very, very musical also, like Sylvia Plath's poetry. After this impossible image or an oxymoron, the poem here begins with an address to an unnamed and silent addressee. The addressee is a man whom Madak speaker Madak speaker also speaks in first person and uses a confessional ban this time. She says, Madak speaker says, this man, the addressee, is angry at her for writing floral or flower poems. Similar to Madak here, similar to Plath, excuse me, Madak here also in the very opening line also introduces 2 contrasting images. And well, she introduces men and flowers. Her tone, however, is emotionally distant because she uses the word bayım, it means sir, and it is in Turkish an unnatural way of addressing a man, and it's copied from Hollywood movies. Well, it's a translation from that we can see, that we saw and still see in Hollywood movies. So,
Evrim, sorry for interrupting, but is it possible to share that poem as well?
Which one, Hocam?
Didem Madak's poem.
Can you not see it now? Oh, sorry, I thought I was
No, I don't.
on it. Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I think you can see it now,
Yeah,
right?
now we see.
Okay. So I just, well, sorry, I didn't know you couldn't follow me. So here is kind of a side note that says I'll become the Negro princess and then life will begin for me. From PP, the long something, sorry, I forgot the name, I can't find it now. So the poem begins with this impossible image of a black woman becoming a princess and then life beginning, right? And well, I think this is also a slight a tiny look into the impossibility that the poem will shortly express. So I was saying from here in the first line, Didem Madak says, "Çiçekli şiirler yazmak istiyorum bayım." And the poem here begins with an address to an unnamed silent addressee. We don't know who he is. The addressee is a man whom Madak's speaker knows, but he's also, but the tone is also quite distant, as I've already expressed, and it is this distance, this emotional distance, is amplified with the word, with the use of the word bayım here, sir. Excuse me. Sir, which is a translation, sorry, a Hollywood movie translation, and it doesn't sound very natural in Turkish. The man is angry at Madak's speaker because she writes floral poems, apparently. But then, here Madak's speaker also this Madak speaker here goes on to, from here on, she goes on to explain how and why she needs flowers. And she explains why she needs them. And she says she needs them because she hides her body, her mess of a body, behind floral patterned curtains. And Madak's flowers with this introduction also appear as sophisticated and subverted symbols of her hidden and oppressed feminine identity and ideas of confinement in the domestic space. At this point, Madak also uses flowers as sophisticated symbols, and they suddenly remind her of a painful memory. She remembers an instance of lovemaking that is painful and that is reminded to her with the effect of these flowers or floral poems that she needs, because she apparently needs them to hide herself. So very feminine, I think, again, setting the domestic scene, domestic setting as the scene, and she is the woman, the intellectual woman that hides herself behind these curtains in the domestic space. So she remembers a memory, and again, this memory of lovemaking just is compared to a knife, another everyday object, an object of the kitchen. And the sharpness and acuity of pain here is defined or explained through another domestic item. She then moves on to compare herself to, she tries to explain to the reader what she is. And she defines herself as a basement girl, and this is most likely a reference to the times when Madak lived in poverty in a basement apartment in Izmir, and the idea of being a basement girl also functions as a symbol for the poet's difficult confinement, again, in the domestic space. Next, she does something interesting here, very remarkable, and also in that she again tries to, like Sylvia Plath, she tries to express her identity through inanimate objects. Here, Didem Madak says that she is now a plastic vase that won't break. She doesn't break anymore, but she is a vase. Well, it is made of plastic, but she is a vase, and the sole function of vases as holders of flowers is known to us all, right? So again, she uses an item of the domestic space to express her state of emotion here. Of course, she is frustrated, she doesn't break anymore, but still she holds on to that feminine essence that comes with the flowers that she is going to, or hopes to, hold sometime maybe in the future. But she feels deformed, she feels maybe hardened by the life that she has had to lead so far. Now, after this comparison of herself to plastic vase, again, she addresses this silent addressee, that man. And we learn that she wears number 43 size boots. Again, I think number 43, size 43 size shoes, very masculine image here, also juxtaposed with the image of a plastic vase. And she announces that she is afraid that she will trample on children that are playing on the flower of gardens, well, also a metaphorical garden maybe, in the heart, because, well, she can still hear those voices of children. They're playing, they're enjoying themselves, but the man will come, and, well, she will trample upon the flowers and the children that the woman is growing. Well, this of course is not particular, I mean, this is not something that only appears in this poem, of course, because these women, I mean, it is, as we already know, it is the woman's traditional role, right? Growing flowers and children. So she brings them together here. And I'll skip the next bit where she talks about a dream, which is, in my opinion, a dream of total miscommunication, or a total lack of communication. She wants to tell somebody about her dreams, because she believes that people should be allowed to tell people of their dreams when they see them, or when they want it. Well, there is again the emotional distance to the man that is the addressee of the poem. And in the next poem, in this part, the third stanza, let's say, she goes on, the speaker of the Madak goes on to tell about a traumatic loss, the traumatic loss of her mother. Also, another similarity perhaps to Sylvia Plath, because she was also traumatized by the loss of her father. She was deeply traumatized by his loss, in which we can see it has become a persistent problem in her relations to men. And probably we see an echo of it here. But this time, this woman is suffering from the loss of a mother, a sudden loss. And with this line, I think the emotions that the poem communicate grow darker and more intense, and the speaker is now wants to. What did that? Just, I think this is this. Well, now from a dream, She wants to tell about a dream that she's had, but she can't. And then she moves on again to the realities of her life, the traumatic realities of her life. So it is the dream space is left there, and now we're back to realities. Sorry. Here she says, well, I think this is a very frustrating paragraph. She explains this pain that she had to go through in very memorable images, I think. So the speaker is frustrated probably because she couldn't share her dreams with the man, and she begins the longest stanza of the poem by sharing very painful memories of her past. Referring to her mother's untimely death, she says that her soul was only 14 when it began to grow older at the coldness of a marble table. In line 27, bir mermer masanın soğukluğunda yaşlandı ruhum, she says. Well, this is a cultural and a religious reference to a coffin a coffin stand that is available in the yard of every mosque. And she sees her mother there on the coffin stand, and her soul suddenly grows stiff and older. She also adds that this incident, after this incident, she was left metaphorically fitted with thin and white prosthetic legs, with which, and she had, with those thin and white prosthetic legs. Well, here, of course, the loss of her mother is the same as the loss of a vital limb, and she now has to wander around the city in these thin white prosthetic legs, and she is always accompanied by the squeaking sound that the legs make. So they're always there to remind her of the pain with their sound, similar also to Sylvia Plath's Tulips, I think. And only she can hear those sounds. Well, again, a similarity. The feeling of hurt that speaker conveys through this metaphor is immense, in that the loss of her mother is the same as losing a vital organ, and she's left crippled in a crippled body with prosthetic legs, as well as a prosthetic life with her mother's death. So she has prosthetic legs and now a prosthetic life. Nevertheless, nevertheless, life goes on, and she has to continue wandering around the city while boys whistle at her prosthetic legs, indicating how her pain remains invisible and unrelatable to those around her. Well, I think here is the difference also. Sylvia Plath uses the tulips and to symbolize, to represent her existential angst or anguish. But here, this speaker that Madak uses is suffering more from the loss of family. She's not suffering because of the family, because of the existence of a family, but this time she's suffering from a loss. And beginning in line 33 here, also, here before that, when she also, this experience of loss, this traumatic loss of her mother, she says, uses, well, to introduce the idea, she uses an interesting expression here. She says, o ara içimde çiçeklerden oluşmuş bir silahsız kuvvet ablukaya alındı. This is almost like a military intervention in its sudden arrival, this trauma, this loss. And what she remembers here is the ways in which those flowers that are inside her, that metaphorical flowers, were ambushed by arms, by forces, but forces that are unarmed, creating some sort of melody in Turkish, although, well, it doesn't really sound the same to me right now. And then beginning in line 33, the speaker explains how she tried to escape from her pain and memory through cinema. And well, that also explains why she uses the dress bayım or sir in the opening. So she uses cinema to escape from her pain and memory. And but she fails apparently because she cannot forget anything. And she sees this almost as a curse, craving for a moment of utter happiness, emptiness, again, very similar to Plath, resonating her desire to be left alone, and she wants to also leave behind her past, her life, her identity, and the losses. This inability to escape, however, is also precisely what makes her think that writing flowered poems is good for her health, because they should serve, they should provide a way of escaping from the voice and pain of a spinning wheel that keeps spinning inside her. The pain is always there, but apparently flowered poems bring, or supposed to bring, the speaker some ease from the pain of remembering these. So the final stanza here grows more and more frustrated in tone. And well, there were, I think, bits and pieces of hope coming with the children, the image of the children playing in a garden, but that all seemed to be in vain right now, because although she is hesitant to admit this to herself, she is in a state of hopelessness. So the final stanza of the poem begins on a further note of hopelessness and frustration, when the speaker declares that neither large ships nor large sails are there anymore, which metaphorically means that she has already burned the bridges, right? And she has tried everything to escape, but nothing is left. Now she's left with nothing, and all she wants to do is to go back to her paper and poetry and writing. She says she wants to burn larger pieces of paper now. And very suddenly here, in line 49, the image of a black cormorant, a bird that dives into water and disappears for some time, appears. Then again, switching to her realistic scene into a dreamlike one, she says she wished the black cormorant emerged, having swallowed the whole world. Again, an indication of this speaker's desire to be effaced or annihilated from life and from the face of earth. This, of course, echoes Plath's desire, this longing, this pleading desire for annihilation. And in line 52, here, the speaker turns to the addressee again and asks a very careful question in a very distant tone again. She says, "Is death not a hefty word, sir?" So now she's again playing with the ideas of annihilation and death. And well, this is a rather a philosophical question, I think, to ask to this distant man. But then she jumps to a contrasting flower moment, and she expresses that she smells like bitter chrysanthemums, which are at once associated with funerals and death. So here, there is a garden of flowers, and this speaker, Didem Madak's speaker, the feminine voice, goes from flower to flower to flower, trying to find ease in them, trying to find a way of escaping her reality. But in the end, she just ends up comparing herself to chrysanthemums, and well, they're flowers of death. So that's all she can get to. And by defining herself as chrysanthemums in these closing lines, the speaker once again draws attention to how her livelihood is defined by death and how she is still crippled, although vibrant with life on the outside, but only associated or feeling death on the inside. And this is, I think, a powerful metaphor that because the speaker shifts her perspective once again and mentions a domestic scene in the following line. And the domestic scene involves the image of two poor, well, a very happy and soothing image of two poor lovers happily cooking fried eggs with sucuk, that is traditional Turkish sausages, on a stove, and she attempts to turns these lovers into flowers, but she fails. I mean, she can't go on anymore. And the romanticism of these lines, well, they were already very sudden, but the romanticism of these lines is interrupted with an ellipsis at the end of line 56 here. It just, well, here there is a comparison to roses, and it says a rose told another rose, and it just abruptly comes to an end. She stops there and she admits very intimately, admits that she was lying with these images, and this atmosphere of a faraway happiness thus suddenly gives way to despair, and the speaker interrupts the scene by saying that she is lying and that the roses, the ultimate symbol of life and love, do not talk to her anymore. So as we can see, these poems really employ and discuss poems, flowers, very feminine, a very feminine imagery and symbol to discuss and express their emotional and existential angst that they both seem to experience. So to conclude, and well, in conclusion, the poems I have examined and compared to lots of things, but there are some things that they do in a very similar way. Both Plath and Madak recreate intimate details of their individual lives, and they use a feminine flower imagery in a parallel, subverted manner, although they both do it in their own unique ways. And through these images, they communicate their frustration with life, and this frustration seems to come from their responsibilities, well, mostly from or challenges of being a woman, and they seem to be torn between their families and their individual beings. So Plath sees the vibrant red tulips that suddenly appear in her hospital room as threatening, dangerous animals which should be put behind bars at the end of her poem. And their vividness reminds Plath of her, nothing other than a desire for annihilation. So their image, their associations are really reversed here. On the other hand, Madak employs flowers and floral patterns as objects that can be used to veil and ease her existential and emotional agony, although she fails to do that. But, well, she at least searches for consolence in them. The tulips are with Plath speaker and against her, almost against her, watching her, talking to her at the same time, and they consume her oxygen as the speaker wants to resist the whole life-affirming images of these flowers represent. So those tulips are there from the beginning till the end of the poems. They become talkative, and then they begin to talk, move, look, and watch the speaker. And they're there all the time, and they're acting as painful reminders of her already painful existence. Madak's speaker, on the other hand, goes from flower to flower, only to compare herself in the end to chrysanthemums. Both women in these poems clearly suffer from the life and liveliness that their respective flowers represent, only to remind them of an existence they're forced to go back to, no matter how difficult or agonizing their experiences. So this woman there, Sylvia Plath, we have Sylvia Plath there. She has to go back, although she really desires that state of emptiness. Also, on the other hand, we have Madak's speaker, whose pain remains invisible to those around her, although the loss is like losing a vital organ or a limb for her. So they are both weighed down by a baggage, and their wounds correspond to the objects in their domestic spaces. So finally, the confessional and autobiographical mode of their poetry and fine simplicity of their poetic diction brings together the voices of these two women from vastly different backgrounds and localities. There is humor, intimacy, simplicity, sensitivity, melancholy, philosophy, and authenticity in the poetry of both poets. And both poets seem to be in pursuit of a higher sense of meaning and belonging, although they're not, well, their desires are not really fulfilled in this highly patriarchal world they are supposed to live in. However, in my opinion, there are many similarities, as you can see, but the main difference, in my opinion, between Plath and Madak is the core emotion that their poems respectively communicate. Plath's poetry displays a more agitated, a more furious mode. She is very frustrated, and she doesn't want to be here. She just longs for annihilation. Madak's poetry, on the other hand, communicates a persistent melancholy, but there is acceptance in that melancholy. I mean, she doesn't really try to go anywhere, but she just expresses a desire, because she apparently can't really hold on to what she used to in this part of her part of her life. So still yet, their core emotions are different, I think. So Plath talks from a more agitated, a more furious perspective, but Madak's poetry is more melancholic, I guess, and more maybe she just gives us the impression that she's given up on all her hopes. The men in her life are distant. She can't really communicate. She can't really share her experiences with a man in a relationship. And yet they are truly female voices, and these voices preserve their feminine essence, and they use this female voice through subverted images to defy the associations, the positive associations attached especially to flowers, as well as other domestic objects or everyday experiences. Still yet, I think their poetry come together and they show us how identical human emotion can be, especially feminine emotions at the face of common challenges that all women experience throughout the world. I think this is all I can say about these poems, and thank you very much for your patience. Sorry, I was quite nervous, and I just know that I made so many mistakes. My hojas watching me here, but thank you very much for your.
No, you didn't at all. Thank you so much, Evrim. It's
Thank
clear
you.
to see that you're so passionate about these two poets, and
I love.
thank you so much for this wonderful paper. It's amazing to see that, it seems like these two poets are talking to each other almost like in conversation, right? Okay, this is great. You should consider publishing this. I think it's really great.
Thank you so much,
Okay.
Didem. I know it has a long way to go before it can go there, but well, yes, they really talk to each other, I think.
Yeah, amazing. Okay, do
Thank
you have
you.
any questions for Evrim, or do you have any comments?
Yeah, I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Evrim, thank you ever so much for introducing us to Madak, or introducing me to Madak anyway. Of course, I don't know Turkish poetry or Turkish poets. But I just wanted to ask you, what do you think might be the significance of both Plath and Madak choosing flowers as a metaphor to represent what you describe as peculiarly feminine concerns, domestic burdens, baggage, etc., etc. Do you think there's a particular significance of that? Do you think they're trying to say something through the choice, since they both choose flowers as that sort of dominant metaphor?
Well, yes, I think so, because, well, they were both intellectual women, and they knew, well, despite, although they were, well, they were truly oppressed by these emotional baggages and the burdens, but they were also intellectuals. They weren't really feminists. Well, I know that Sylvia Plath, for one, doesn't want to call herself a feminist. But I think flowers are, well, here the use of flowers is very deliberate, and they both use these flowers. They're, well, instantly feminine objects, right? And their use of flowers here, I think, correspond to their understanding of this system, this binary system, because there is the feminine and the masculine, and they use flowers to, I think, kind of, they're foil characters. Like flowers, they're a foil character that kind of amplify the maybe those things that we associate with men, like how can I put it? I'm really out of words right now. There are ideas just flying around in my head. But what I'm trying to say is they deliberately use these flowers to create a contrasting effect with the highly masculine environment they always find themselves in. It could be the domestic space, but there are the risk of men coming with their boots and trampling on the flowers. So masculine, and, well, also flowers are raised. Also, this also could refer to the woman's burden or responsibility of growing children, and men, on the other hand, being more willing to kill them. So it's growth. It's a symbol of beauty, also of fragility of the women who are writing these flowers, but well, I don't know what else to say, but well, I think they create a contrast with the masculine world they're placed in, I think.
Okay, thanks, Evrim. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I maybe ask a question?
Yes, Trevor. And meanwhile, Evrim, perhaps you can stop sharing this poem if you like. Okay, please.
Okay, thank you very much, Evrim. And again, like Francesca, I'm very glad to have been introduced to Didem Madak, so thank you in particular for that. You were just talking about the danger of men in their boots, the danger to flowers of men in their boots. But actually, what I was really struck by in Plath was the danger of flowers with their mouths, right? And so I wondered whether the Plath was not so much about the danger of masculinity as actually about a fear of a kind of ravenous oral drive associated in the Plath poem with the speaker's own sexuality, right? So we've got the mouths of some great African cat, the mouth of some great African cat. We've got the tulips eating my oxygen. We've got their sudden tongues. We've got their redness talking to my wound like an awful baby.
Yes.
And the only thing that closes its mouth is the dead, right? And again, that deadness seemed to be connected with the idea of becoming a nun and therefore presumably shedding one's own sexuality. So actually, rather than being a fear of masculinity or of men, again, I wondered whether it was more about, in some ways, or at one level at least, an ambivalence about female sexuality or orality in particular.
I think definitely yes. Oh, John, yeah, well, sorry. Well, to begin with, of course, flowers and flowering, deflowering, of course, they are always a very, very strong symbol of female virginity. So these flowers, however, when they appear in this state, they are talking, they are eating, they're closing their mouth, and they are like awful babies. They also, well, that drive, well, also they, as you mentioned, these also, I think, refer to that sexual drive, but the sexual drive that these tulips represent, I think, also brings back painful memories, because as far as I know, this operation was, well, the operation that Sylvia Plath had to have, this appendectomy operation that took place right after a miscarriage. Actually, one of her miscarriages, I think there were a couple. So following that, well, it must be a very traumatic experience for a woman, and following that miscarriage, she's hospitalized, and now she's losing her consciousness. She wants to succumb to that feeling of emptiness there. So miscarriage is also there, I think, as an important life fact, and they might be amplifying the image of flowers and their, you know, their comparison to an awful baby. So, well, I don't, well, well, you weren't exactly asking a question, but they are also shedding, they also, in both poems, I think they also shed that, sorry, they also reflect a shedding of their femininity, but I also link this to their desire to non-exist in this world, because flowers, they're very strongly feminine, right? Well, they also, you know, there are words that are used in relation to flowers to imply certain actions like deflowering of. So these flowers are also there to remind them of their hidden or perhaps oppressed sexual desires or challenges as well. Well, I think that's all I can say.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you, Hocam. I wonder how you see it, though.
Well, like I said, I mean, I think that it seems to me that the Plath is full of this ambivalence about an orality which may be connected with the baby, or perhaps there's this weird triangulation between the mouth of the baby, the mouth of the tiger, is it a tiger, or the mouth of the great African cat, and the mouth of the speaker, but put that alongside the nun imagery, right? And I feel that there is actually this rather negative affect around female sexuality, but the other thing that's really interesting, right, is the echoes between the mouth that speaks and also, as you were pointing out, the wound, right? So yeah.
Okay, can I add something? Can I add something to what Trevor's saying? I think that this notion of the wound, I mean, surely that's the vagina. And so you have the sucking the oxygen, you know, like for a woman, any sexual act becomes a potential child, right? Conception, and which of course isn't the case for a man. And the fact that it's sucking the oxygen and then the awful baby, and of course awful, you know, you said she had 2 miscarriages, so there'll be a lot of blood being shed, and then you've got this red tulips and the mouth of the tulip. So I think there's a very clear link being made to the mouth of the red tulips, and of course the labia and the sort of aperture, the vaginal aperture, out of which a baby would emerge, right? But it's a wound, and of course you've got this idea, the myth that you know, women are lacking something because they don't have the penis, therefore the vagina becomes a kind of hole, H-O-L-E, as opposed to a W-H-O-L-E. So this almost this sense that women always seem to have of this lack, they don't have the male. I just think there is, as Trevor said, there's definitely an ambiguity there in the sexual, she's obviously questioning, or there's a negative image of female sexuality, and I think that clearly comes through the wound, which, as far as I can see, would also be seen, the vagina is a wound, if all the, you know, if it's a source of pain and miscarriage. Anyway, that was, I just wanted to add that to what Trevor was saying.
I think everything about their femininity is a source of pain for these women. So it's whether it be a baby, vagina, or flowers, that anything that relates to that talks to their wounds or their femininity is they're really negative. They all create very negative images. So their flowers are deconstructed flowers. I think they're distorted flowers. They're not the flowers that we're familiar with. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Evrim.
Any more questions or comments?
I feel like a bit of a fraud asking a question because I missed, I was teaching during your discussion of the Plath. But I loved your discussion of Didem Madak. I have to, Didem. I really can't wait to read her poetry. I was fascinated by the prosthesis you mentioned after the death of her mother. And I'm curious whether there might be some parallels between Madak's discussion of, I mean, her relationship to mother loss, or dealing with mother loss, and Plath's, and again, I'm sorry, I missed the Plath. So, but the loss of a potential child. might there be some parallel there or no?
Sorry, the parallel between prosthetic legs or from her mother's loss and Sylvia Plath. Did I miss what you said about Plath?
No, just the difference between the so I missed the discussion of Plath, but was there in how what's the relationship between the loss of Plath's you know, the miscarriage and the loss of Madak's mother? Is there any, I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, well, I think that the wounds that I have, they are, as in Madak's case, they always remain invisible to the world. So first, Plath's wound is silent, it doesn't speak. And I think it's the same with Didem Madak, because she doesn't, first she wants to tell about a dream that she had the night before, and then something stops her. And with that miscommunication or lack of communication, she again turns to the traumatic loss of her mother that left her metaphorically crippled. And I think Sylvia Plath here also has the same thing. There is that wound, it's there, but she doesn't really affirm its existence, like, well, similar to what she does with the flowers. So they both have these wounds. Sylvia Plath's is both a literal and a metaphorical wound, but Sylvia Plath's wound remains a metaphorical one. But still, their natural tendency or the feminine role maybe just tells them to hide these wounds. But this is where poetry comes in, I think, because that is the moment they turn to poetry to express their suffering from these wounds. And these poems also act as well, especially in the beginning, they just, what do? That Plath just ignores the flowers, and also Madak also talks about flowers in a positive light, in a somewhat positive light, but then the wounds make themselves present there. So I think that's all I can say about this, that they are both suffering from losses.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we're running out of time a little bit. So if you have no questions, well, of course, you may ask later on. Evrim is always with us. I think it's time to end our session. Well, thank you all for joining our seminar. And thank you once again, Evrim, for this wonderful talk.
Thank you, John.
Okay, so we
Thank you, both of you. Thank you.
Thanks, Evrim. Thanks, Evrim.
Thank you, Evrim.
Thank you
all.
Thank
Okay,
you again.
see you, everybody. Take care. Bye.
Take care. Bye.
Nice
Bye.
Bye.